name is Jason Smith, and I am proud to serve as the Chamber Ambassador. I will be supporting today's session as your co-host. Before we begin, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to invest in your growth and your organization. Wednesday Wisdom is designed to bring timely, relevant insights to our business community, and today's topic could not be more important. Workplace safety and compliance are evolving, and organizations that learn how to anticipate risk, not just react to it, are the ones that will lead in today's environment. It is now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, Sheila Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Jason. It is amazing to be here with the ATL Airport Chamber, both as a board member and just as a member of the community at large. As mentioned, I am Sheila Michelle Foye. I'm more commonly known as Michelle in the community area, and I'm excited to talk to you from Precis Screening, which is a company where I serve as founder and CEO, about the next era of workforce compliance. And Jason, if we're ready to get started, I'm happy to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, perfect. All right. So, as mentioned again, I'm Michelle Foye. I'm CEO of Precis Screening. We are a 24/7 national provider of workforce, workplace, recruitment, retention, health, and safety solutions. And so, what does that mean? That means that we are able to schedule. So, for example, if you have a dump truck company, we're able to perform all of your drug screening as well as serve as your CTPA for compliance purposes. If you provide laundry services, you're not regulated like the dump truck company may be by the Department of Transportation, but you may want to take a credit for being a drug and alcohol free workplace, and you also have a workplace drug and alcohol policy, so we're able to perform your drug screens as well. And so what I want to talk to you all about, though, because the conversation around drug testing and compliance sometimes can feel very boring, it can feel very mundane, it can kind of be the eating of the peas that people don't particularly want to do. It's not exciting, right, in the world of business and entrepreneurship. But it is necessary and it is often required, right? And so I want to talk to you very specifically about the next era of workforce compliance. So, given the contrast that we are currently navigating, right, and that won't change. This country, our people, everyone, we have lived with contrast generation to generation. But again, compliance is something that is necessary and required. And so how do you kind of hold on? How do you hold on and ensure your compliance with all of the change that often occurs? All right. So really quickly, just about me. I'm a native Atlantan, proud native Atlantan, but I have also lived coast to coast, East Coast to West Coast, in my corporate experience as a technology program and project leader. I have a very interesting journey into workforce safety and compliance. I did not start out that way. I did not seek that at all. I spent 20 years working for the gas company, for Truist, for Accenture, Capgemini. I work with the hospital systems, Grady, Piedmont, Morehouse School of Medicine, and all of those types of things. So I was not actually interested or looking for this vertical as an entrepreneur. But what happened is that 10 years ago, my oldest son was murdered, and it was drug and gang violence related. And so I had a God calling to start a drug testing center. And so I simply took all of the experience and expertise that I had gained in corporate and from my education, and I opened up a drug testing center. But more than that, God had called me to create a national network of drug testing centers and clinical labs to improve the socioeconomic and health disparities, particularly in communities of color or diverse communities or underserved communities. And so that ended up looking like us, helping more than 3,000 people understand how to be a part of this industry and service the needs that are outstanding, but making drug testing more readily available. So I have drug tested people so that they could get custody of their kids, so they could have this visitation with their kids. I've drug tested people because they have a court requirement because they're on probation or parole. I've drug tested people simply because they work for a major corporation that doesn't have to drug test, but they value a safe workplace. And obviously, I drug test for DOT regulated organizations as well. And so, whether it is drug testing for a family, drug testing for a small business, an individual, or a major corporation, we all should understand where do we stand when it comes to compliance and safety. When we think about our desire to have healthier, safer, happier communities, safety and compliance are necessary ingredients into that formula. So I have kind of a checklist right here for you to kind of assess, and I would love if you would engage with me in the chat and just be very frank about where do you stand. Do you feel like you're operating more reactively, or do you feel like you are leaning more towards what we call predictive safety, which is, from our standpoint, the vision for the next era? So, if you, how many of you already have a drug and alcohol policy? Can y'all drop that in the chat for me? If you already have a drug and alcohol policy for your company, and there's no right or wrong, nobody's going to get any tickets. Kelly says yes. That's awesome. Baha says yes. Jason says yes. That's good. Good, 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 good. Okay, awesome. Now, Jamie says yes, for sure. Okay, so that being said, the tip that I want to give you about your policy is to don't let it get dusty or stale. Make sure you review that policy every time you onboard a new employee, every time an employee leaves, or every 6 months, or at worst case scenario, once a year. Make sure that the policy is to protect you and your workforce, right? So you want to make sure that it addresses the different types of employees you have. You may have exempt, you may have non-exempt, you may have admin, you may have field. So drug testing is not really a one size fit all. Okay. But I'm excited and glad to hear that you do have those policies in place, because if you have those policies in place, that lets me know that you are not responding after things happen because you already have a plan in place. It lets me know that compliance isn't just a checkbox for you, it is something that you are actively engaged in. And it ensures that you don't have gaps when it comes to anything that is regulatory. And speaking of regulatory, we know that in some cases we have, medical marijuana that's legalized. We have just marijuana that's legalized. We have the rescheduling of marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and which actually deprioritizes it from a drug testing standpoint in the DOT world. And so I know that a lot of times those things can be vague and it can be tough to really understand, how does that apply to me? And more importantly, you're busy. You got a million things going on. So how do you even make time to analyze how does it apply to you? And so I'm happy after this call, if anybody wants to book a complimentary consultation, I'm happy to look at your drug and alcohol policy or answer any questions that you may have around that to make sure that it is airtight. Okay, so for those of us who have a drug and alcohol policy, how do we go into the next era? What does going into the next era look like? So anticipating and preventing events, right? So the drug and alcohol policy is kind of like, okay, somebody gets a job, they get a drug screen. Every so often we do randoms, they get a drug screen. If they have an accident, they get a drug screen. If somebody thinks that they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they get a drug screen. And in doing so, that is a form of anticipating and preventing events. But what really nails this is when you're actually using data to identify risk patterns, right? And so I know that some of us, I don't want to make the presumption that all of us are smaller businesses, but if we are a smaller business or a small business, we may not have a lot of data because we may not have this huge workforce, right? And so I want to encourage you to tap into resources that are sending you data for your respective industry so that will clue you in as to if you may need to tighten your policy or practices to be consistent with risk patterns that don't just come that don't just that outcome isn't just hire somebody, fire somebody, random, or somebody had an accident. Then we want to talk about embedding safety into your daily operations. So there are, every month of the year has a cause, right? So there are certain months that talk about safety very specifically. But whatever the month is, you may want to have like a safety newsletter that comes out once a month. You may want to have additional signage once a month. You want to create a safety challenge. So I would encourage you to just kind of gamify it, so to speak, so that your teams become, they buy in, they identify with safety, and it doesn't seem to be so much like a chore. All right, sorry, let me get this down here. All righty. So really quick, what are some of the things that people overlook, right? So we already talked about incomplete drug and alcohol policies, weak incident reporting culture. So like some things don't actually go reported. But this kind of speaks to getting your teams to identify with safety in a positive way. Sometimes there's not a return to work protocol. So let's say somebody has been out of work and they may have called in sick for a number of days, as an example, right? You know, absenteeism is highly correlates with drug and alcohol use, quite honestly. And so just kind of looking at what does that return to work protocol look like to ensure, for example, you may want to have a policy where you drug test people when they come back to work, depending on how many days that they've been out. But you also don't just have to drug test, just to be honest with you. There are other things that you can do that don't feel invasive, that still clue you into as to whether an employee may need some support in this area, but it also helps to protect you as an employer. And those things look like addiction prone assessments. And that's something, again, through a consultation, we can discuss further. Getting down to dollars and cents, the average cost per employee for workplace injury is at least like $1,000, right? And for some people, that may not sound like a lot of money, but it definitely can add up. And that really is on the lower end, right? Because if you have someone who comes to work, they're under the influence. A lot of times for me doing these drug tests, it is just that person involved, but not all the time, right? And then also we have to think about sometimes when people come to work and they smell like drugs or they smell like alcohol, those things affect your other team members. And so truthfully, if those team members wanted to bring, the old adage, anybody can sue, they could bring a lawsuit against you for the type of work environment that they're in. So I have $1,000 on here, but truth be told, I would multiply that by a million. Just think in terms of a million. Could your business sustain $1 million lawsuit because you don't have predictive measures in place? Now, when it comes to proactive safety, which is what we are encouraging, there is a 3 to 5 times ROI on proactive safety investments. And I know a lot of times when we look at implementing things in our business, we can be concerned that, hey, this is about to cost me money, or hey, this is about to cost me time. I want you to look at having a predictive safety measure or safety measures in your business as something that will actually make you money. Okay. Now let's get into the 5 pillars of predictive safety leadership, because we know that everything starts at the top and it flows to the bottom, right? So as a leader, what should you be thinking about for the next era of safety, which is predictive safety? Assess or assessment, right? So again, even if it's just an annual check, what does our policy look like? When people are getting screened, are those screens coming back clean? Or are we having a number of positives? Are we having a number of temp out of range? Are we having a number of refusal to test? So actually looking at your data, right? And assessing the culture of your workplace and coming up with something where safety becomes more of a partnership and not just an obligation. Align, ensuring that your program matches your industry and your workforce size and your regulatory requirements. We don't want to, take the carrot. The point of the carrot is to incent the rabbit, not to beat the rabbit, right? And so that being said, we don't want to be overly anything. We want something that we want a safety program that is a fit. Just like you put on a shoe that's your particular size, we want safety that is a fit for your organization. My favorite, automate, right? Because at my heart, I'm a technology girl. So using technology and data to follow risk indicators so that, again, you are able to predict what may happen and you already have a response that will reduce your risk. Number 4, activate, training your leaders and employees to recognize, report, and respond, right? So they say, if you see something, say something. I say, if you see something, do something. And finally, advance, continuously revising your approach, right? So in our companies, if you look at, I'm gonna age myself. So I remember when Doritos came out, right? I remember when Doritos came out. So growing up on Doritos and Snickers and baked beans and, you know, what's the others, the Sour Patch and all of those things, Twix. Think about how the candy industry, right? Think about how that industry has innovated itself over the years. Now we can get M&Ms in 5011 flavors, right? The packaging is different. We can get it in things individually packaged, like the Hershey Kisses, or we can get a bag where they're just all in the bag. And so the same thing applies to us when it comes to safety, right? We have to continuously look at ways to keep safety a fresh topic in our organizations. So starting this week, what can you do? You can book a consultation with me. We can look at your policy, see if you have anything that you need to shore up that does not cost you a dime. um, any gaps that we identify, you can take those back to your team or to your desk and simply come up with a 30-day plan as to how to fill those gaps. And then within the next 90 days, really look at for the next era of my business, because when I'm focusing on my business, I'm not just looking at what I'm doing at my desk today. I'm thinking about my business 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. This is where I want my organization to be. And based on that, what should my safety program look like? And I want to pause right here and do another quick check in the chat. I would love to hear, like, what is the 3-year goal? So 3 years from now, what do you, my Zoom, okay, thank you. What do you want? What's your goal for your business 3 years from now? What would be your goal? Will you have more locations? Will you have a certain number of clients? Uh, will there be additional services? Do y'all mind sharing that in the chat? Kelly says she wants to scale to multiple cities, which means that from a safety perspective, Kelly, you would be wanting to make sure you are in compliance with the city and states that where you are operating. Jamie says she wants another truck and more staff, which means that you'll be needing to ensure if it's still, I'm presuming the truck and staff going to be in Georgia, but well, I don't know if you go over the lines or not, but whatever the case may be, similar to Kelly, if you're going to be going across the lines, then we want to make sure we're compliant with where we're operating. And if we are adding another vehicle and we're adding more staff, whatever systems are tracking our current vehicle is the same thing we want to use to track our new vehicle. And if we don't have a system, because I know some people literally have a system that says, hey, Jason's medical card is expiring next month, which would allow Jamie to be proactive and ensure Jason gets scheduled for his DOT physical, instead of it being a thing of Jason saying, oh shoot, I got this route, but my medical card is expired. So I would say making sure that your systems are ready to account for the truck and staff. Baja Ware says another location, and same thing there. Making sure you're compliant local and state, and that your systems can handle the additional people, whether they are customers or whether they are team members. Jason said he's adding a new partner and 5 new roles, and that is amazing. Congratulations, Jason. And so, that being said, the biggest part of that, I would argue, Jason, or suggest, is going to be you and your partner being on the same page about what does predictive safety look like for your organization. All right, so we're going to go back and I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, cool. I did it. All right. Now, so the whole point of this slide, of this presentation, is to share with you that workforce safety is not just about compliance. It is a leadership strategy, and each of you are leaders. And so you have to do what leaders do, which is lead. If you set the ball for predictive safety in motion, everything about your organization will follow, but it starts with you. And organizations that embrace predictive safety are better able to protect their people, reduce liability, build more resilient operations, and I'm going to say make more money, which I know we all can appreciate. And that concludes that part of my presentation. I just want to leave it open for Q&A.
If you have any questions, go ahead and come off of mute and ask Michelle anything you'd like to know. If you're still a little shy, go ahead and put your questions in the chat.
And I'm going to throw my link in here if you all want to book a call just to go over your policies or answer any other questions you may have about, the legalization of marijuana, the rescheduling of marijuana. How does that play into things? If you don't have an EAP partner, I do believe in second chance programming. I very much believe, that people can go through substance abuse counseling, and you may have somebody who's really a great employee, and I use myself as an example that, losing my son, I definitely could lose my mind very easily. And so thank God that didn't happen to me, or I didn't use drugs or alcohol as a vice. But for those people who do, they may be a great employee and something happens to them, right? And so you can partner with them through second chance programming. And I have put my link in the chat, so y'all can feel free to click on that, schedule time. I also put my email in here too, just in case you have any issues. I do, aside from the ATL Airport Chamber, I do sit on the board of the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. So if you all are looking, I mentioned data. So if you are looking for something to plug into that would just kind of keep you up to date about your industry or about the industry, let me know as well. Yeah. So yeah, no, I think that's great. So some of it is like languaging too and communication, right? I feel like communication is the most underused tool that we have as humans. So if you say, hey, we are a drug and alcohol free workplace, that is totally legal, right? You are a drug and alcohol free workplace. So, how do you make that legitimate legally? Is you define that in your drug and alcohol policy. Hey, you if you work here to work here, you are required to take a pre-employment drug screen. If that drug screen is, you know, um, if that drug screen is positive, it is an immediate, offer, rescinding the offer, or you do not pass a drug test, you cannot work here. If we run a random drug screen, and you have to document that you do randoms in the drug screen in that policy as well, right? You can't just go drug screen Jason without that, because then you open yourself up to be sued. So you have to describe specifically what your random process looks like. So random is random. Random doesn't mean that I get to pick Jason. Random is actually a tool where all the names go in there. So many people are drawn, and the people get selected by the tool. Okay. People may still feel like you're picking on them. I've had people tell me they feel like they're being targeted. We don't know if they're being targeted, because the way that it's supposed to work is how I just described it. So, to protect yourself as a drug and alcohol free uh, workplace, you need to document your pre-employment, that you have to pass the pre-employment. It cannot be positive. You need to document specifically how your randoms are done. And then you need to describe what the termination policy is. So, hey, if you get a drug screen, if you get drug tested, let's say somebody had an accident in your warehouse or something. If you have an accident in a warehouse and you get a drug screen, you will or you won't be paid while we wait for those results. When those results come back, if they are negative, you resume work. If they are positive, you will be dismissed, and this is the process. So it's really the documentation when it comes to legitimating all of what it is that you want. When it comes, but I do also want to just share that also language is important, because you can be a strict parent, right? But you still need leverage with your kids, right? Meaning you can be strict, but you still need to attract a workforce, and you want to attract the best of the best. And so, how you share that you are a drug and alcohol free workplace, the messaging that you use is important as well. So, you want to talk about why being a drug and alcohol free workplace is important, because it helps people respect each other. One thing is just respectful. Two, it's safe. It helps people, everybody get home to their family, right? And everybody wake up to their family. So I would just say you can be strict about it, but just be careful about your languaging, because you still want to be very welcoming to the people who are, right? Because some people don't do drugs, but they just don't, they may not do drugs or drink alcohol or whatever the case may be, but they just don't like to feel boxed in, or they don't like to feel that other people are boxed in. So I would just say be choosy about how you language things, when you are promoting your jobs and your job descriptions on your website, all of that. Anybody else?
I have a question for you, Jamie.
Okay.
In our field, we get a lot of SAP drivers, and I
Mhm.
don't quite want to hire the SAP drivers because it take what would be the language if I decide to hire a SAP.
So yeah, so the SAP drivers are a challenge, primarily because most people don't know what to do with all of that, right? So like we will get people and they're just like, okay. I went to the SAB. Can I get back on the road? Like, they don't understand. We need to see the letter from your SAB to understand what your SAB's assessment was and what they say your follow-up plan is. And it becomes a challenge because the drivers are on the road, and how do they actually get their return to duty done? How do they get their follow-ups done? They're embarrassed about being observed, all of those particular things. So I would say, to protect yourself, you you I will have to make sure of this, but I think you probably could just say people have to have a clean clearinghouse query. Do you know what I mean? So, like, you may not be able to ask people on their application, are you under a SAP program? I don't know if it's actually legal for you to ask that. But what you can say is all hires require a clean clearinghouse query, meaning you cannot be prohibited. So if you get somebody who's not prohibited, that means that they should be clean. Like, maybe they were SAP at one time, or either they're like ending. I think they get unprohibited after their return to duty. So if even, let's say, two scenarios, either A, they're crystal clean because they just crystal clean, or three scenarios. B, they're clean because they did their return to duty and they just have to do their follow-up. So if you run the query and you see that they did a return to duty, but they still have follow-ups, you just want to make sure you are referring to their SAP letter. And you can say, hey, you're going to be on probation until you complete this SAP program. You can also pay them a certain amount of money until they get off of their program. So I think you can kind of get creative, but also keep yourself in good legal form.
Yeah, because once you run that clearinghouse, it's gonna tell you whether they're on the SAP or not. So that's why
Yeah.
should I ask? Should I already put it out there? Are you a SAP returnee? Or
I wouldn't ask them that on the application. I would just tell them that as part of your pre-employment process, you run a clearinghouse query.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then when you run that query, you look at their query before you go any further with them.
Makes sense.
Okay. Anybody else?
I actually have a question.
Oh,
Your thoughts on warnings, second chances versus zero tolerance in your
yeah.
policies.
Yeah. I think the first of all, it all just needs to be consistent. So whatever you do, put it in that drug and alcohol policy. So that's like, we always go by this. I think warnings would come into play if somebody has a good work record, like it's a good employee that you want to keep. You know what I mean? Um, I think so. Warnings and or second chances, to me, that's for somebody who may have been working here a long time or who brings a lot to the table. I think immediate dismissals are anybody who fall outside of that, to be honest. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you'll find yourself doing warnings and second chances for everybody if you don't have that high of a criteria. Now, what that criteria is, I think you have to figure that out. Like, is it, hey, they scored a 4 out of 5 on their performance evaluation, or their manager, recommends them. Thanks, Kelly. You get what I'm saying? So I think it's about
Yes,
figuring
thank
out.
you.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. It's like, okay, what am I actually going to use to give this person a warning or give this person a second chance? But you also get to bake in, what does that look like? Right. So if I test positive, even if I'm not regulated, see, in Jamie's world, DOT says this is what has to happen if Michelle is driving and she tests positive or she's found drinking. So Jamie doesn't get to determine that. DOT already says what that is. So you, Jason, in your non-regulated world can say, okay, Michelle, we're going to give you another chance, but you have to go through counseling at your own expense. You know, you have to do drug screens on a periodic basis at your own expense. So I think you can do that. But you just got to bake in what your criteria is. And I highly suggest you do it because, you know, the reality is people are drinking and people are smoking. That's the reality. And so that's why I strongly say, like I was talking to Renata, like, so that's why the languaging is important. So we're trying to change people's minds intellectually. You know, we're trying to get them to understand, hey, do you realize that when you smoke and drink, that you can develop vascular dementia, like somebody in my family has? And when you develop vascular dementia, that can affect other things like your circulation, and your leg can be amputated, like somebody in my family. Do you realize that when you drink and smoke, that it impacts your relationships generation to generation? So I ain't gonna go on a tangent, but do you see where I'm going? Like, I think it's like about getting people to understand it here and here. Because otherwise they just think we're party poopers or Debbie Downers and we don't want them to have a good time. But, it's about us having stronger communities, as a whole, and drugs and alcohol just don't make for a strong community. It just is what it is. Like, I don't care how many after five socials we have, how many, what do you call them, happy hours, whatever the case may be. Drinking is just as bad as drugs, but people focus more on the drugs, right? Because it's like, if you're not having an adult beverage, you're not cool. But it's cool until somebody dies. It's cool until it impacts somebody's family, So I think I'm preaching now, but I think we have to figure out language to get that over to people, because even I think Young Dro, he's on a sober mission. I think what's her name? Black China's on a sober mission. I think even 50 Cent talked about, like, these people talk about like how they operate so much better not under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And that's really what we want to get people to understand, is that you are a brighter star sober than you will ever be under the influence.
I love it.
Yes. So that's my TED Talk. That's my TED Talk. And, I speaking from experience, y'all. Speaking
I
from
love it.
experience.
I love it. And it was wonderful. Thank you, Michelle, for such an insightful, impactful session. Your perspectives are very helpful, incredibly valuable, and we appreciate you sharing both your expertise and your strategies with our audience today. I want to see your TED Talk on the TED Talk very soon. To everyone who joined us, thank you
All
for
right.
being a part of today's Wednesday Wisdom. We hope you are leaving with some actionable insights that you can take back to your organization and implement with your teams. As a reminder, today's session was recorded and it will be available at the ATL Airport Chambers YouTube channel. So please feel free to revisit that and share with your teams. And